Welcome. I made it back from my mom's basement. Oh my gosh, it's been such a journey. A live streaming journey, a road trip. Oh, well, yeah, I actually want to tell you all about it. So, welcome to the most. Ah! The ghosts still have me a little bit. You're going to hear all about my journey right this weekend. And we're going to carry on with our discussion of the vending machine people and what does it have to do with Coca-Cola and dinosaurs and oh well, yeah, welcome to the Mosaic Arc. We're back. We're back. Okay, so do
So what happened?
Oh no, I knew you'd ask me.
What happened down there in the basement?
It was a trauma. It was a trauma. You know, I had all my tech ready. I had gotten special setup so that I could, you know, be like tech cool and use my iPhone as a camera. And I mean, what's fun is, you know, my mom has collected a lot of old stuff over the years, and I had this old school desk that I was actually set up with, and yeah. And then well, we'll hopefully we're going to try the chat tonight. On everybody watching on Unauthorized, we are going to achieve chat. So whatever happens, whatever ghosts I end up hearing talking to me, we're still going to stick through, and I'm not going to quit, and I'm going to stick around. But I didn't do it on purpose at the end of the stream because, well, I'm really tech good, you know.
We should just rename it Spooky Chat now.
We should rename it what?
Spooky Chat.
Sticky Chat.
Spooky, like
Spooky Chat.
Yeah,
we should rename it Spooky Chat. You know, I think you need to get closer to your microphone, lady. Yes. So we could name it Spooky Chat. I did everything correct. It was entirely the ghost's fault.
It was.
And if you believe that, you're not pushing me hard enough. Shall I?
Well, I mean, I don't know exactly. Like, can I tell everyone what happened to you? I mean, you've given me ghost stories, but what exactly happened down there in the basement? Do you want to reveal to the people?
I traveled back in time. I traveled back in time. That was it. To freshman year in physics.
That's too much lived experience.
No.
You can't be time traveling.
I clearly was, because I was down there in the basement where I did all that. I bragged on camera. Did you hear me doing it? I did my calculus homework down there when I was in high school, because I was, of course, in calculus, and I think I even took AP calculus. I'm pretty sure I did pretty well on it, because like I went to Rice University, which when my parents were there was called the Rice Institute, but they were I'm an alumni kid. They were the last class to graduate as the Institute, because it had been like this major like tech school, and did a lot of engineering and architecture and everything. And when I was there, it was called Rice University. I'm gonna keep talking until you interrupt me.
So, no, I'm just letting you I'm letting you paint the picture to everyone that you've graduated from a tech university, and yet our stream cut out for a very, very interesting little reason, didn't it?
I had no idea what you were talking about. It was ghost. I
Mm-hmm.
As a freshman at Rice University in 1982. Took I don't think I was actually I don't think I was in honors physics, but I definitely wasn't in the physics for art students, because I was gonna be an astronaut. Did I tell you that? This
No.
is all going to be topical to our vending
She's
machine
changing
people.
the subject. She doesn't want to tell you all what happened.
Why should I want to?
And I'm going to out you.
You're trying to out me. Why are you trying to out me? I still think your sound is a little low. You need to speak up, because you're not going to humiliate me sufficiently well if you don't speak up.
It's right there. Can you hear me now?
A little bit better. Yeah. So we're gonna do the tech
Maybe
right.
I forgot to plug something in.
Should I have to? I've got my earphones in. I've got my power power cable this time.
All plugged in today?
Did I get my power cable plugged in today?
Miss Rice University?
Miss Rice University. So my first year in physics, we did mechanics in the autumn, and if you've done proper
electrical circuits,
did we maybe in the spring?
Mm-hmm.
I did really well in my tests in electrical circuits.
Uh-huh.
All of the
Did they have many practical classes in those?
We did. We had lab. We had lab.
Uh-huh.
In addition to the lectures and the exams, we had physics lab.
Mm-hmm. So did they explain that plugs go into the wall socket?
I don't know what you're talking about. It was we had oscilloscopes, and we had
She doesn't want to tell you all. She doesn't want to tell you all what really happened in the basement.
What really happened in the basement? What really happened?
And I'm trying to be gentle.
I am, and I'm still worrying that I'm not hearing you. Let me double check. Can anybody listening on?
Okay.
I'm not going to go to the chat yet, you guys. Let me double check on your output, because I'm really good at this stuff. I can do advanced audio properties, and I can make sure. Can you speak?
This woman is one of the most brilliant intellects alive, and yet
I'm not sure that's true.
Well, in my opinion, and yet struggled with something.
Quite basic.
Very
yes.
Basic.
Yes. Okay, so fine. I guess I'll tell them. Right. So you dragged it out of me. I used the wrong power adapter last week.
So I'm worrying about it being the Freemasons cutting the stream.
It was. It was.
Thinking I'm going to get thwarted because I'm talking about magical obelisks. She didn't plug in the power adapter.
My power adapter. Oh, look, maybe if I turn the sound up on my own laptop. Now can you talk?
Yes.
Oh, that's better. Okay, so see, the most basic thing. You mentioned the Freemasons. Now, this is interesting. I learned, in fact, that William Marsh Rice, the founder of Rice University, was a Freemason. So I was actually going to a Freemasonic school. I didn't know that at the time when I couldn't. Okay, so last week.
Somebody's going to be adding this to your Wikipedia page.
Well, it would be an improvement on my Wikipedia page. Right now, all they do is call me names. If they called me a Freemason,
very low quality trolling.
Wouldn't that make me, a proper, upstanding Middle American? This will feature in our story of my road trip. You realize I still haven't told them what happened in freshman physics.
Would you like to finish that?
Will you let me talk about something else if I do? Are you gonna keep pestering me to confess?
No, I want to hear about the power outage problems.
My true complete failure in physics.
Yes.
Which I did go on the next year to do differential equations. I got an A+ in differential equations. I did. Mm-hmm. And I did vector calculus that next spring, and I don't remember what I got in that one. I'm not sure I did as well in vector calculus. I like drawing all the pictures.
Yeah. But what happened with all of the
I'm
Plug-in
really good
issue.
on paper.
The calculus helped you.
So what I learned in physics the first year was, as good as I was at doing all of those proofs, which I do think is actually topical to what made me a good historian. I was very, very good at doing all the physics proofs, all the trigonometry proofs, all the vector calculus and differential equation proofs and stuff. I wasn't so good at actually plugging the circuits in. And what was hilarious, and I realized this last week, it was like, fail. What happened to me in physics my first year in freshman physics was I did really fine in all the labs because I had this great lab partner. He was really good at setting up all of the circuits when we were doing the experiments, and I, wrote them up and I understood them and stuff. But in the final for the practicum, we were presented with some they were embarrassingly easy equations. I could tell that. What I couldn't do was get the right readings on any of the meters to prove that I knew that those were really easy equations.
So when you're saying there were ghosts in the basement, what you really mean is you're haunted by the memory of a failed practicum.
Yeah.
That it was repeated last week when our stream cut out because you didn't pay attention in physics.
Maybe. I certainly didn't pay attention enough to understand the difference between the power adapter that I use on my iPad, which is basically pretty low key, versus the power adapter that I'm supposed to use on my laptop, which apparently can charge a laptop faster than the power adapter that you use for your iPad. And I had plugged in the wrong one. Because they both use the same little, like lightning thingies, or maybe it's not lightning, maybe it's micro USB. I don't know. Apple keeps changing their adapters. I just plug stuff in. It's pretty. But ask me about the Masons.
I was just thinking, you've just proved absolutely that you're female with that statement. It's pretty. I plug it in.
It's pretty. I plug it in. And we had Apple in college too, because Apple, my sophomore year, my junior year, I said I was in physics 82, 83, and then I was never in physics again. Maybe I should have been. But
ran screaming from the physics school.
I did. I ended up being a very good historian because I was good at proofs, just not plugging things in. Apple came to Rice very early on, right? We had my first Apple was one of their little desktops with 512K RAM. I can't even load a picture on 512K. Can you imagine?
I'm trying to imagine.
I went from learning to type, which I mentioned last week, learning to type on the manual typewriter in that basement, to taking typing lessons the summer after I graduated from high school, and we learned to type on the IBMs, and I got a Smith Corona. The fancy thing I could do with that Smith Corona was correct with this. I could do the motion because I had to do it. This correcting cartridge, right? So you could either use little strips or whiteout or these cartridges in and out, in and out. And I had to type on the electric typewriter my papers for freshman and sophomore year. But then Apple came along and they had these amazing machines that you could type into and to do corrections. You didn't have to do anything physical. You could just backspace.
You were digitized.
I was digitized very early there. And we'd actually, my mom, back before I got to Rice and the Apple, my mom had actually bought us a Texas Instrument desktop, and I remember programming things in pixels. I was going to do computer programming and stuff until that freshman physics lab.
So you remember the Wayback Time before computers?
I remember the Wayback Time before personal computers were the normal thing that everybody was working on. Yeah.
And now you're streaming from your mother's basement.
And now I'm streaming from my mother's basement.
And not plugging in your device.
So no wonder we got caught in a time loop and I couldn't figure out what to do.
Well, it's confusing. Time travel's hard.
Well, but interesting.
You're doing a lot of traveling too, so like maybe I don't know. We'll let you off the hook.
There's
You did do a lot of
time
traveling.
traveling and space traveling, yeah. And we need to figure out whether they're different in this vending machine culture that we're in.
Well, did they feel very different during your trip? Time and space?
Yeah. Well, so the trip is from Chicago down to Texas, and it is in fact on what was Route 66, which there's a song about that the Rolling Stones sing. You get your kicks on Route 66, but the Route 66 road itself is now a tourist attraction that you have to get off the interstate from to go see the pretty bits that are on off Route 66. So it's like the road is the same path as the old road, but you're time traveling constantly between the new interstate road and the promise of this old road that's right beside it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Parallel roads. That feels very familiar to what we're doing, doesn't it?
And then I talked my brother into coming up to Chicago and driving down with me. I talked my husband into coming down and driving back with me. So they had to fly at the other opposite end of these because I wanted to travel
See what she does? She talks people into things.
I do. Streaming along. So, but I needed the drive, right? My husband and I have actually been doing this drive together now for some 30 some years, almost 30 years regularly. And I need it. I need that trip on a regular basis. Otherwise I talk about reset, right? I don't feel like I'm in space and time correctly if I haven't done that 2-day drive.
Interesting. So it's an orientating trip.
Yes, it's 2 days down, 2 days back, and it's a the stop in the middle is also a really important part of it. You stop at this motel that is like an actual drive up, park your car outside the motel. But we've always stopped at the same motel for 30 years now. And that was a sort of time travel effect of saying, this same hotel is here. How is that the case? It's not a historic one in the vintage version of things, but it's just still functioning in the way in which Americans used to think of road trips as a kind of well, it's a particular kind of journey, it's a particular kind of transformation, but because of the things that you and I have been talking about, and particularly things we were talking about last week, it's taken on a rather more I don't know, magical or prophetic or spooky.
She's on Spooky 66.
I'm on Spooky 66 still. 66, that's a pretty funky name, a pretty funky number for that road.
Everything about America is funky. It seems.
Well, this is what I was thinking. It's like we were talking last time about what kind of place is Australia. And we want to and you were saying you can see things about America from Australia that we don't necessarily recognize ourselves as Americans. And then from America, Australia, but Australia and America are two poles of the same empire. And we were talking about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've got different stories. So our road trip would look completely different to the one that you took. You've gone from Chicago to Texas, so north to south, and you have all of that history that you've been traveling through. That you've got the kind of pop mythology of Route 66 and music that's been written about it and all of that kind of stuff. We've got our own roads down here, different stories. But what do you think the most significant thing is about that journey? Why is it so orientating to you? I'm interested about that.
Well, for one, it goes through my birthplace. It goes through St. Louis. And in Centrism Games, our first poem, we put St. Louis there at the center of the poem. It's the beginning setting for the story. Centrism, right? We chose it, so it's the place where East meets West. but it's my birthplace that I never lived in. My parents were there in medical school after being at Rice. And then after they finished their training and as doctors, we moved out to New Mexico. So I also this trip went out to New Mexico again. We regularly go to, so the trip is sort of, it's the center, it's literally flyover country. It goes straight through the middle of the continent, through nothing, right? And that I was at a faculty dinner in June, which was very funny because they decorated the hall very beautifully, and it looked just like Hogwarts, because University of Chicago has various dining halls and libraries and things that could be used in movies for sure. And at this faculty banquet in the Hogwarts, we had a jazz singer perform with a guitar accompanist, and she came up, she did a set, she sang a number of different songs, and then she said, I'm going to sing the song that I get the most requests for and build the anticipation, like, what is the song going to be, what is the song going to be? And she starts singing it, or he starts playing and she starts singing, and nobody recognized the song, and it was Route 66. It's like there's a room full of, talking about the smartest people on the planet, right? It's some of the smartest people on the planet in the university system. All of the professors, not just history, but it was scientists and business people, and surrounded. I had some really good conversations, people I hadn't met before. But she's singing this song about, from Chicago to LA on a route that I have driven, twice a year at least, sometimes more. I drove part of it when I was growing up too, because we used to live in Kentucky. So go from Kentucky to Texas and then on to Albuquerque. A road that I know very, very well as the landscape and the place names and the feel of the sky. I mean, but mostly what I think about when I think about this trip is how the sky changes. And then the land starts out very flat here around Chicago, and gets more hilly as you go through Missouri, and then it's actually quite beautiful when you're going through Oklahoma, because eastern Oklahoma is very hilly and trees, lots of trees. You go through Oklahoma City, which clearly sits in the middle of the land break. I mean, that's why the city is where it is. The land changes. And then on the opposite side of Oklahoma City, you're in a much more flat, canyony kind of region. And all of this, that is for me, it's like that is the road that I read The Lord of the Rings on. So I think it's like, how many layers of time?
You were taking the road to Mordor on Route 66?
Well, no, not to me. To me, Mordor, where is Mordor in this story? That's interesting. I'm traveling with the fellowship to the mountains in this journey, because the end of it, in my experiences, we tend to go as far as New Mexico and then not further. I have driven it further along to LA for a fencing tournament, but most of the time we stop in the mountains, right? So it's the road to the mountains. I guess it's, to me, like going from the Shire to the Misty Mountains or something. And then what happens in the mountains, what happens there. And so it is literally for me the most storied road that I know personally, because we used to go, on that road to go to see my grandparents, on that road now to go see my mom, on that road now to be out of this coastal flying population on the land.
Yeah, because we we don't have that geographic change here. I'm just thinking of the distinction between the two. So that our continent's basically just desert in the middle of it. We've got the East Coast, which are it's where most of the capital cities are along the east. It's greener. There's a little bit of water and whatever. The majority of our continent's just completely dead, deserted. There aren't even any mountain ranges in the inside of it. So we don't have these beautiful long drives that you guys in America have. But why do you call a flyover country? Why is it flyover?
Well, because people fly from one coast to the other, and they go, it's from New York to LA. And it's what I've realized, and I think I don't remember whether we've talked about this on stream, but you and I have talked about this, that one of the strong sensations I have now about roads and riding on the roads is they're rivers. I'm trying to think. They're faux rivers. They're, no, what is the word for it? Surrogate rivers. That's not, none of these words are right. They are they're replacing the rivers, because one of the things that happens, the reason St. Louis is where it is it's on this confluence of the Missouri, the Ohio, and the Mississippi, and I guess the Illinois too, because they rerouted it so that it would go into the Mississippi. So the land is divided by this giant river, and St. Louis sits on the sits there on the bank, and that region is curiously known as Little Egypt. Because I mean, I'm not entirely sure. I was sort of talking to my mom about it and saying, you know, do you know why they called it Little Egypt? And she hadn't really known that. So it's one of those things. The other thing, so there's my story that goes through this land, and then there's these layers of story that you may or may not be aware of if you're going through these regions. One of the curious things about St. Louis is that the site for these mounds. The archaeologists call them mound builders, and they're basically flat-topped pyramids, earth mounds with flat tops, and
like ziggurats. Ziggurats,
sort of. But they just look like hills now, flat-topped hills. And it was some time before people, the European, Anglo-American settlers, however we call ourselves, moving in there, recognized that they were something other than simply bumps. Right? Because they don't look, I mean, they look built if you pay attention to them, but they don't necessarily look like, they're not rock. They're earth mounds.
Okay.
But there's some of them are moderately tall, and they were centers of fairly significant settlements. And one of them was, they're called Cahokia now, right across the river from where St. Louis now sits. So you say this was already a settlement area. There's no writing to describe what happened in these mounds or these pyramids, so it's solely archaeological speculation. Some of the objects found in them look rather South American or Central American, but they could have come by trade. So it's, you know, maybe trade down the Mississippi through the Gulf down to the Yucatan, the Caribbean, say the Mayan, who knows, right? I think that there's not. We don't have stories about what went on in those cultures, and they all left before any Europeans showed up. They weren't driven out by the Americans coming through. Or the United States coming in. Those settlements were already abandoned. But the road, you know, the Route 66 goes right through that region. You say, okay, what layer of story are you in there? Okay, so wait, there's a river story, there's the road story, and then it's also the railway story. It's the railways connecting the East Coast and the West Coast. And one of the things that Route 66 does is it also follows things like the Santa Fe rail line, which started in Chicago and went all the way down to New Mexico. And the settlements, the American, I'd say the United States people settlements, are spaced for both of those things, for the road traffic and the railroad traffic. And those two transportation networks, the rail and the road, for a time made this the sort of .com region. I think it's like, this is where all the startups were. You have all the people, it's like, well, go west and you're going to found a town and you're going to make. But once the airplanes came in, and you have the ports, the airports, you can fly from one major city to another. Then we, as United States, reverted to our maritime origins, and this became flyover country, right? It's kind of the middle that nobody travels, except for all the trucks that are carrying stuff. So they're like ocean liners, ships, the ships of the rivers.
So you've got the freight.
The freight.
Yeah, you've got the freight going through, freight trains.
Right.
And freight road trains. Okay, that makes sense. So it's a kind of restructuring of empire based on traffic, then, isn't it? I mean, it's all about traffic in the truest sense of the word.
Yes.
You don't have civilization where you don't have traffic.
Yes.
Interesting. So you've got little abandoned pyramids. I'm putting all of this together.
Put it all together for the.
You know,
I have a mosaic that was.
I need my Hatshepsut fake beard on when I do.
You do. You do. Let me give them a different picture for you talking about. Here she is. She's putting on her Hatshepsut. Don't worry about what pictures I'm showing. I'll just, you talk.
Well, it's very interesting because you've got this, you've obviously got a history of some kind of pyramid building civilization that for some reason just up and abandoned. I mean, why would you just abandon everything? There's so many questions, but also the other thing that you've mentioned is that they left no writing about themselves, which means clearly somehow illiterate people are capable of producing something resembling advanced architecture at some point. I don't know. It's very interesting. And this is even before the United States gets itself assembled into existence.
It's before the Spanish are there. It's before so this region that I'm describing or driving down through it was Louisiana. The French were there, and the Jesuits were there long before the English show up.
Thus St. Louis.
It's Saint Louis.
So you've got the croissant people arrive after the pyramid builders have buggered off. Why did the croissant people leave?
Napoleon sold it to the United States.
Okay.
Napoleon was busy trying to conquer Europe. And in 1803, it seemed a good idea for him. It's the same way the United States, well, I guess it was the English before it was the United States, acquired New Amsterdam. The English traded the Nutmeg Island for New Amsterdam, and it became New York. This region. So I started high school in Louisville, Kentucky. So another Louis. I was born in San Luis. I'm describing, it's like I was younger when I was in New Mexico, Nuevo Mexico. When we moved from Nuevo Mexico to Kentucky, all the kids in Kentucky said, are you American? Weren't we Mexican? Well, what's interesting is we actually, my parents actually moved from San Luis to Albuquerque. At the same time, a lot of the whites showed up in Albuquerque because of the labs that the United States was building there. So it's very federal. That part of the country has you're very aware of the federal government for two reasons. So I've described, we've gone through San Luis, the great Crusader king. Now we're going to go down through Missouri into Oklahoma. And Oklahoma was, of course, Indian territory until it wasn't. One of the things you see as you drive past, to go through Indian territory, aka Oklahoma, is casinos.
Interesting. Why so many casinos?
Oh, well, yes, indeed, because they're run by the tribes, they're nations, and each different nations have different arrangements with the federal government, the American federal government, to be able to have these casinos. But they built a lot of them now in New Mexico. They weren't there when I was growing up. They're, say, between Albuquerque and Santa Fe, you see huge casinos, and similarly along the road to like around Tulsa, big Hard Rock Cafe one by Tulsa. These are gambling that the money goes to the tribes, and you have to be enrolled in the tribe to be able to get the revenue from these casinos, but they're casinos.
Okay. So you've got empires playing swapsies for different patches of territory, and then you've got tribes that have negotiated with the empire to start up casinos.
Yes!
Your country's fucking wild.
Isn't it wild? And you will never. It's like
What?
what's hilarious about all of this is
Australia is nothing like this. Like, you've got to understand when I say it's different. This is next level. Sorry, keep going.
But I bet you most Americans will know a lot of this history, but won't be conscious of it. They won't be conscious of the bizarre layering. Talk about the time loops. We haven't even got to the Masons yet. I mean, we will get to the Masons.
Yes,
maybe
we will.
Do we want to see if anybody's actually talking to us, and let's see if I can start this chat this time. Let me see.
I'm gonna cross.
Okay, please, everybody. I'm UATV. I'm about to look at the chat. If I get monsters again, I'm. Oh, look at this! Look at this. We've got. Okay, thank you all for joining. Now I will now do roll. All right. So Mel is here. Part 2. Yeehaw! Yes. Okay. Andrew J. Welcome. Good evening. Standing outside bear. Good evening, Dr. Brown. I've really enjoyed your podcast so far. Thank you so much for sticking with us as we were learning all the tech. You see, I couldn't.
She aced physics.
I aced physics, just not the practicum, right? Manual, woo! Andrew J. Traveled back in time, and did you consider killing baby Hitler? Just kidding. Stick with us. We'll get to, well, maybe not in this episode, but there. Okay, standing outside bear, I hear fine. Andrew J. USB-C. Is that what so Andrew, that's the little one is the USB-C. Okay. Jordan on. Whoops. Frankly, this is proof one needs to be a rocket scientist to handle Apple products correctly. Now, you say this, this is brilliant because of course, Rice University owns the land that NASA sits on. For real. So, also Rice also, I mean, they did when I was there, and I tell this as lore. I assume it's still true. They also owned the land that the Astrodome sits on, so the football stadium. But indeed, Rice University is so closely tied to rocket science. Kennedy gave his "We're going to the moon" speech on at Rice University in 1961. He gave it in our football stadium, which was hilariously huge because when my parents were there, Rice actually fielded a football team that could challenge the other Texas teams. That was certainly not the case when I was in college, and we were mainly known for the marching band that did not march. They just ran from formation to formation because it couldn't be bothered to practice formation marching. They called themselves the
marching band in that case.
They called themselves the Marching Owl Band, the mob, and they dress in fedoras, and there's a lot of Rice stories in there. But when Apple was giving us Rice kids the opportunity to buy their products and get us hooked for life, worked. I did go to Olivetti for a bit when I was in graduate school in Cambridge, and that's all they had. They had the Olivetti Italian, and then I switched. Okay, anyway, I came back because I do actually like Apple aesthetic. Clearly, Apple was trying to get its way into the moon shots, right? Okay. Mm-hmm. Burning pitch. Does it still take 3 tries to plug it in correctly? Probably. Ethers are. Boy, I tuned in at the right time. Well, ethers are. If you don't help me with my electronics this weekend, I'm stuck because you're driving me. Everybody come to BaseCon if you're not signed up already. Watch for videos if hopefully we can make it. Okay. Inquisitor Bear. Hey, is this your Rings of Power fan stream? Just kidding. We have, and love your work, Rachel. Thank you. We actually have a plan to do a Galadriel stream probably next week because we need to think about this girl power thing. So yes, Rings of Power. Mel, far over the Misty Mountains, cold indeed. Thank you. I'm glad I made it safely back to River Run, Cement Rivers. Ethers are the Great American Desert. Well, yes, there's a lot of that. Casey, yes. So we're flowing back into where you all were listening. The maritime culture gave way to the caravan culture, rivers into roads. Nice. Yes, we need this fits in our McLuhan meditations that try, and the vending machine people came out of that conversation as well, that all streams together. What kind of media are roads as opposed to rivers, as opposed to rail? as opposed to airplanes, and now the streaming. And our streaming, we're getting back into something that has to do with the maritime very powerfully, and we're building to that as I'm telling Kilt's the story tonight. So stick with us. Okay, Casey and Mel are now saying hi to each other. Ken says hi. That's right. Rainwater Bear says Rice only owned Clear Lake land temporarily as a part of a land transaction. If you know more about that, you can explain to me, because what I mainly know from Rice is, the kinds of things that the tour guides tell the prospective students about things on campus, and so it could all be fake. It could all be mythological. For example, I wasn't aware that William Marsh Rice was a Mason until I was there in April this year, and my host at University of St. Thomas, the Catholic school, was saying, they're Masonic there, and I'm like, what? I didn't know that. He says, yes, look at the shield, look at the heraldry for Rice. It's like these owls. I'm like, yeah, we had owls on campus, right? And he says, no, look at, it's got the Masonic diagram there.
Hoot hoot.
Hoot hoot. Okay, so happily now I've been able to see the chat, which is great. So shall we carry on talking now about roads and rails and?
Yes, we should.
Where were we?
Well, empires playing swapsies with territory is probably a good way to start.
Empires playing swapsies with territory. So go back to Australia and think about why is what I've just been telling you about the American story so different? Because the Australian, you have Aborigines, so you have native peoples that were there before the European settlers come in. You have multiple layers of European settlers, like the United States did. A multiplicity of territories, in fact. So I was describing Oklahoma had one story and then got given a different version of the story when they let the American settlers come through. I mean, that has always struck me as some of those things are actually similar for us.
Yes, we do have some similarities. We're not completely distinct in the sense that we had to have the same kind of development after Europeans arrived here on the continent. But the first thing you've reminded me of, and I'm thinking about, is just geographically how different we are. This is a desert continent. It's mostly uninhabitable landmass. So we don't have this river system that you guys have in the North American continent. Right. You have the enormity of the Mississippi and all of these other rivers that are running all over the place. We just don't have any of it. Most of the major rivers here, you guys would kind of see them as large creeks. Mm-hmm. And the water reservoirs that we use have been engineered to hold the amount of water that they have in them to sustain population sizes that have grown here. So we just, in terms of the unengineered continent itself, Australia was a completely different territory to colonize and take over. You couldn't just jump on a canoe and row up the Mississippi or whatever and find the interior and settle there. We had to stay by the coastal areas. We've always been facing towards the ocean for the most part.
Well, so that in effect makes you, Australia is more what the United States behaves like now, which is no interior.
Yes.
Coastal facing. Always facing the ocean, and therefore facing the international maritime trade, primarily.
Yes.
Ports.
Yes.
Okay.
They're all port cities. The majority of the cities here are port cities.
They're all port cities.
Yeah.
When you say our navigable rivers, Louisiana is really focused on that big river system, and that what the French were doing here when they were talking to the people who were living here, particularly the Jesuits, and they were trading with them. So the big fur trade, the big beavers and okay, keep going.
Okay, so I'm just thinking. So they've gone upriver. They've established trade with the indigenous tribes
Mm-hmm.
or indigenous nations of the interior there. So we didn't have this kind of situation because there weren't large river systems here that established international trade in the same way that the North American continent had it. So our tribes were primarily nomadic. They didn't have settlements, and in order to trade with each other, they had to go over incredibly large distances on foot, because of course we didn't have horses here. They didn't
Right.
exist. So I
Well, the
mean,
Europeans brought the horses. There were no horses here
okay,
before the Europeans.
okay. So that's just
They're Spanish. All of those horse herds they're Spanish, which it
okay.
is interesting that the great horses in Europe were Spanish horses as well. So, you know, I think like the Mustangs and stuff. No, but the Spanish have the horses. So the herds of horses, the herds of wild horses in the West, in the United States, they're from Europe.
Okay. All right. So they've been introduced. So that's a
Yeah.
similar thing. But we haven't had an enormous opportunity for internal trade here. I think
Mm.
that's the difference. So we planted all of the colonies were planted by these uh, bay areas, which had waters that were deep enough to establish ports for freight shipping, and then the populations just sort of stuck around those port cities. And you see them, even the ones in the West in Australia, they revolved around the port. Everything about Australia revolved around the port. So
Hmm.
we've always had this very mercantile character about the country, and the interior has been really it sort of just exists in order to feed the cities. There is no, or the port cities, I should say. There's nothing outside of major capital cities here. So, in terms of what that's done to the people, the way that we think, and the way that the population's changed,
Hmm.
uh, we are mercantile, we're maritime, and very cosmopolitan now because of it, I think. So probably very similar to what happened with your New Amsterdam.
Well, I'd say maritime is cosmopolitan. That's if we can
Mm.
get people thinking in those terms. When saying we're dealing with the globalists versus the nationalists, that
Mm.
Contemplations on the Tree of Woe did a really brilliant essay a few months ago on the world island versus the world ocean, which it was a theorizing that came out of the First World War in the early, oh no, but before the First World War, 1908 or so, the early 20th century, understanding that you have Eurasia, this giant landmass, which is the world island with the oceans, and
Mm.
that the two great poles in world history had been control of the oceans or control of the interior of that world island. So the Silk Road, the interior,
Uh-huh.
and that recognizing that the British Empire, which we've been talking about with the
Yes.
Elizabeth problem, right? The Elizabeth problem. What shall we call it? The Elizabeth problem, right? Elizabeth and her pirates, Sir Francis Drake and Sir John Hawkins, setting up to control the maritime trade. I mean, England is an island nation, and so they King Alfred in the 19th century is remembered as this, the founder of the British Navy, the English Navy, British Navy. Well, he's Wessex, so he's neither. But the Dark Ages, you can see the origins of the nation coming out of that they were already a sea power back, although the Normans conquered them with their ships. So, whoops. But the
Bloody
the
Normans.
I mean, both the United States and Australia, this is, again, it's the people know this, but we don't think about it necessarily because I've always, probably because I spent so much of my life driving this particular road, thought of the United States as primarily a land place, a place of land. And then we talk
Mm.
about how, Americans, we never go anywhere because most of us don't have passports. And in fact, most people here basically live where they grow up. It's interesting, even with the enormous mobility of the last of my lifetime, right? We moved from I'm born in St. Louis, don't really grow up there, moved to Albuquerque because my parents are there. I'm part of the mobile professional class that Charles Murray talked about coming apart. You just suck all the smart people except for the ones that can't plug stuff in electronically out of the
they have to stay in the basement, or at least they should
stay in their mom's basement until they can figure out how to plug a circuit in. That all of us got, well, maybe the ones that can't plug in circuits end up working in finance or something, right? They go from the center to the coast, but we still we talk about something as flyover country. That was MAGA country. That was, what is it? It's the land-based region. But recognizing, pull this back in, that both Australia and the United States are basically founded by the British.
Yes.
As maritime powers. The thing that we are is ports for the great sea trade.
Yes. We serve the sea power.
We serve the sea power. We serve the sea empire.
Yes. Yeah. So the world island that you described, and you mentioned the Silk Road. So that's kind of what the railways would have been, right? You've got the connection on an interior of the continent, but the British were not established in that way. They needed sails, they needed ships. Mm-hmm. So when we're talking about the Elizabethans and when we're talking about the British Empire, it's sea power. Always. Britannia rules the waves. So,
well, certainly in the period in which it's its empire, because it's in control of. It claims market power in India and Australia, and continuing commerce with the United States, which had been one of its colonies. Canada,
mm-hmm.
If you look at the sun never sets on it because it's got sea routes. It's got the control of these ports.
So it's oceanic. So do most Americans then, do they think of themselves as sea people, or do they think of themselves as land people? Like if you instantly ask most Americans, okay, what is the American empire? Does it belong on the sea or the land? Or people are thinking of themselves as land people then?
I think they'd say land. They'd think we were land, but we're not. We're
interesting.
I think I understand that now. That everything that's going on in big geopolitics is about the United States' control of the shipping lanes. Absolutely. We're trying to keep, as England tried to keep Russia in the 19th century from having a port that would give them access to, they have access to the north, but it freezes. So they want access in Crimea to the Black Sea, which then gives them access to the shipping lanes. The shipping lanes are really, really important. They're critical, and Russia needs access to the Crimea in order to have access to the Black Sea, which then feeds into the Mediterranean, which then feeds into the rest of the whole system. The United States is also right now, doing various military exercises with our ships around Taiwan.
Yes,
and
where all the computer chips are being manufactured.
More streaming.
Speaking of tech.
Speaking of streaming, right, here we are. You realize, so I trust you that you've been thinking pirates this whole time, and we have to pull this all together because the pirates are the big theme right now. Maybe I'll have to change this to the title of this. It's Vending Machine People, the Pirates. The pirate episode.
Yes.
And those of you who are listening with us realize we've been talking about pirates this entire time. We have.
Yeah.
There will be a quiz at the end.
There will be. You also have to spot the pirate.
We have to spot the pirates.
Spot the pirate.
So user number A48 you gotta get a username for goodness sake. Says, I'm an Appalachian Buccaneer Sea Dog. Yes. Somehow we Appalachian
mountain people.
We mountain people are sea dogs. How does that happen? Casey says all American rivers lead into the sea. All products made by its people make their way to the sea. And Mel says are, right? Yeah. So I've been talking about a road trip, but I had this incredible sensation as we were driving. You're surrounded by these trailer trucks, which are big compared to your little boats. And there was in the New Mexico part of the trip, I had my clue, but I'll get to that in a second. So you're driving along these giant interstates, flowing, right? The traffic flows, right? You think about all the language that we use about road trips is in fact river. It's riverine. You can have jams. You can have traffic jams, which is like log jams. The traffic flows. You're in these limited access on and off roads. They're not really roads. They're rivers that you join the stream in. You stream through down past and then across the rivers on the bridges and things like that. But the sensation is the interstates don't belong to the land. They cut through it, and once the interstate traffic it becomes significant. That's why Route 66 isn't really... Route 66 was a land route. You got to stop in the towns. The towns along Route 66 had, nice little downtown areas with shops. Now, if you get off the interstate far enough and find where Route 66 used to go, you'll find little coffee shops. I found one that was Finnegan's Wake, so I knew we were on the right path. River run.
He's running the river.
We were running the river, and then we found a rest stop in Oklahoma that had all of this Route 66 paraphernalia, with also the space shuttle, because an astronaut came from that town in western Oklahoma, and it's all of the transportation mythology was like folded into this one place in Oklahoma, which has other. There was also a plaque there for the people that were killed in the bombing in Oklahoma City. Eventually, live streamers, you will realize every story we tell is the same story. Maybe you've already figured it out, but they all fold into this, recognizing if you want to understand what's going on, each of these pieces constantly keeps recurring. The most fun I had on the road in this trip was we're driving in New Mexico, and it's a desert there. Kiltz, when you're describing what your rivers are like, that they have no water and they're basically gullies with a trickle, that's the rivers in the West, because most of them have been dammed for water sources for the cities. The rivers in New Mexico, are there when it floods. The full extent is when it floods, but most of the time they're fairly small. And we're driving along, and there's this some road construction and a stoplight. I mean, it's there's nothing around. It's like this desert, mountains, mesquite, and a stoplight. And at the stoplight, it says, wait here for the pilot car. And I was like, this is the best thing ever. We need a pilot car to take us along the road. It's like we are being guided into harbor by the pilot car that came along and had to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth on this little route. There were two sections of the road that had these pilot cars. And I said, this is it. This is, again, you know what that region used to be, according to the geologists, right? You're driving through this landscape that's all volcanoes and rocks and volcanoes and such. But on those mountains, you also find seashells. Apparently, it's a prehistoric ocean, right? It's that there was in one of the geologic eras, that region, which maybe somebody in the chat can say what is. It was an ocean there. So you're in this desert now that was ocean, being guided by pilot cars through this landscape. I had this, the mythology was just screaming at me throughout this trip. I mean, and I've said, I've been on this trip many times before in my life, but the feeling of understanding how many layers of time we're moving through, even on something so simple as I got on the interstate, we drove 500 miles, got off. Well, we had some road stops, but, got off at a motel, got back on. You should be aware of how much story is happening constantly around you, whether or not you get off the road, which if you get off, you then realize how many little towns and settlements and such you've just streamed past.
Well, this is how you look at history, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is how we
Yes.
start looking at empire, and we start looking at our current situation. So a lot of people are not looking at all of the layers. They're
Right.
following the particular road that they're traveling on, not necessarily realizing that there's that parallel that runs over on the side that used to be just as trafficked and is now ignored, or they're kind of missing half of the story half of the time. I would be correct in saying this. Whereas
Yes.
what you and I are wanting people to do is to start thinking about all of the layers at the same time so they can analyze things properly, or at the very least see how they ended up in the story at the point that they're in.
Yes. I mean, that's certainly the way I study history. And if I say I've been studying, I mean, I grew up in the region that I'm describing to you, and the thing that English people now tend to say, there was English and Germans and Scots Irish and Dutch and everybody settling these in the first place, and the French and so forth. But the English now, the Europeans, the old world Europeans who still live there say, oh, America has no history. And
why do they say this?
Well, because I mean, to a certain extent, because you can feel how new most of the buildings that you are traveling. I'm wondering, it's like if the global empire, if this great maritime empire breaks up and we end up living more locally, what kind of local settlements? There's along the road through Oklahoma, they're building a monastery. There's a monastery, like a proper Benedictine monastery outside Tulsa, which I still need to visit, Clear Creek. It's like being medieval again would, in this sense, be no longer traveling the great trunk routes of the empire, like the Roman roads with their very expensive maintenance. The only way the Roman roads were maintained is because legions were keeping them up. They're military roads. The United States interstate system is likewise. I mean, I read a little bit of history about it. Say that that's a myth. It wasn't really military. It was just, well, the thing is, they get bigger outside of military bases. The route through Missouri goes past one of the big bases, the Fort Leavenworth base. So they're definitely military. They may be also commercial, but they're those two things are the same thing. The empire is the military power. The commercial power of the Americans is the military power of the Americans.
Just like Rome.
Mm-hmm. Just like Rome. Just like Rome.
Because Rome was a commercial military empire.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, that's good. So we see America as then this kind of new, but you have the monastery being planted in Oklahoma, which means if we ignore Roman roads and go medieval again, what happens?
I think, well, probably very cool stuff. I mean, Missouri is an interesting place because I have family history there because my grandparents, I give my whole family history this time. My grandparents went to school. I say grandparents, both of them, my grandfather and my grandmother, met because the whole family was going to this college in Western Missouri called Park College. It was Presbyterian. Very highly educated women in my family. And Missouri has a number, it also has a number of, there's some other monasteries in Missouri. And when I was in St. Louis this summer for this canon law conference, of course, we're in the St. Louis University, which is Jesuit University, the oldest. Now, the thing you learn in America is everything's the superlative in some context, right? So I think yesterday we saw the sign that says world's largest Route 66 sign somewhere in Oklahoma. And it's like, well, why would you have a Route 66 sign anywhere other than on Route 66? Why don't you just say largest Route 60? No, world's largest Route 66 sign. And so it's like you're the carnival layer of the United States is constantly present, right? And we need to get to that, right? But there are the carnival layer of everything is always some kind of superlative. What was I talking about?
They're always selling yourselves.
Oh, they're always selling themselves. Always, always, always. So the Roman roads, which was a military commercial empire, and the United States interstate system, which we are told is a commercial route, but is definitely capable of carrying troops. Well, and insofar as our border is not closed, these interstates are also the main routes for the drug trafficking, obviously. We come up from the south, so they have commercial uses on a number of layers.
All sorts of markets, aren't there?
All sorts of markets. So Missouri. This is the thing, we have got this spiritual layer always here, but the public visible layer is our vending machine people. And that's the rest stops. You have these rest stops, which are nice little picnic areas and such, but they have two things. They have restrooms and vending machines. I kid you not, that they advertise on the road signs, rest areas coming up, vending machines. I mean, you're supposed to bring your own picnic, but they're vending machines there.
The great roadhouse tradition.
There's the great roadhouse. So Ethersar says the Dwight D. Eisenhower National System of Interstate and Defense Highways. Thank you very much. So it's both. Yep. It's defense. Okay. So we've established they're military and commercial. You got vending machines all along them.
Yep. So we link this back to Lizzie. Then we have to keep going back. We have
to keep going back. We're kind of in the middle of our streaming time right now if we carry on to our canonical 2 hours. Even though this is part 2 of the one that was only an hour because we got, grabbled by not grabbled. It was somebody failed physics. I did so badly on that exam. I turned in a blank piece of paper. And the thing was, I could tell what the answer. It's like, and I did try for a bit, like trying to figure out how can I just like put the answers in that I know I should be getting. It's like I would get readings off of the it was measuring resistance across something. It was so simple. They were so embarrassingly simple, and the only thing I could do was tell how wrong my answers were. I couldn't figure out how to get the right ones. We haven't talked about the Masons yet. Yeah. We have the Masons.
Well, we've got it. We have to keep linking back to the Elizabethans because otherwise people are just going to be like, "Why are you talking about roads? Why are you talking about maritime? Blah 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 blah. What has this got to do with all of us now?" Well, it's the reason that the empire expanded so powerfully, right? Sea power. Yes. So we've been talking about this a lot in DCR, and especially in the work that we're doing at the moment. We've been talking about what it actually means to be a sea power, because ancient civilizations were mostly always, and I can't think of a single example right now off the top of my head, they were founded upon watercourses, river systems, and oceans. It was always about sea power. So if you control the waterways, you control everything. So the British decided to control the waterways. And they did that thing with Spain, remember?
Pirates again. But so the interesting thing about waterways, right? We can go back. I'll put a Nile picture up. How about that? Or Cleopatra's Pharaoh again. The interesting thing about the rivers, everything's flooding right now in the United States. Dallas had a terrible flood recently. There's floods. And then have we recreated the Nile? Is the Mississippi as the riverine Nile? So
you do have a delta. You do have the Mississippi Delta, don't you?
We do, and we have have Memphis.
You've got Little Egypt.
We have Little Cairo and Memphis down there on the Mississippi.
Okay, Memphis.
But you see
bizarrely Egyptian sounding country. Your United States.
Wait, didn't we have a monument in the last episode we were talking about? Look, there's this obelisk in our capital.
The big dick statue.
That is a monument to the president, the first president of our United States.
What a monument.
But
sorry, I can't help myself. It's hilarious. You guys are like, you're so innocent and lovely and pure, and yet the founder of your empire, the statue that's been erected for this guy is literally a giant phallic symbol.
Why do you keep saying that? It's just because it's tall and skinny?
No, it's very phallic.
Well, we know
Egyptian.
bears will know that Owen, I forget now where that picture was, right? Owen had a little demonstration of this in one of his social media pictures.
That's right.
But is there more to it than just that it's tall and skinny and sticks upright?
Yeah,
there is. Oh, okay.
Yes. Well, you've got the link between like what we said last time. We were talking about the link between Egypt and empire in general, because Egypt is the blueprint for it. So we have this, the construction of the first empire in human history along the banks of the Nile. So it develops out of a trade system along this massive river that floods, just like your river, and the mythology that develops around the flooding of the Nile and what that meant to the ancient Egyptians, because that was also a big part of the religious system there. They had to wait for the rain to fall in the highlands of the continent, which is what they called Lower Egypt, down towards Ethiopia. And so you'd get these big monsoon rains, and then all of a sudden the Nile would flood, and it would bubble up and bring up all of these nutrients and all of this beautiful soil from the bottom of the river, and kind of vomit it out all over the desert areas around the banks. And suddenly you've got irrigation. You've got the potential for agriculture in a country where you would not be able to grow anything if it wasn't for this flooding. So the rhythm of this flooding of the Nile then sort of sears itself into the Egyptian mind, and they develop a mythology around why it starts to flood, which is connected to the obelisk that was put up for Washington. Because in the story, in the Egyptian mythology, you've got the gods that are responsible for the flooding, and a little bit of, I don't know, should I tell like a little tiny portion of the tale so that people know? Okay, so you've got the god Osiris and his wife Isis. Everyone knows about Isis because if you're paying attention in the last stream, you would have seen that Cleopatra was depicted as Isis in some of the hieroglyphic carvings on the walls. So Osiris is a great guy. He's got a hot wife, and he's got a brother Set who's a bit of an asshole. And Set invites him over to a party because Set wants to take over the kingdom, wants to kill his brother. So brings him over and says, okay, have some drinks, chill, enjoy yourself. The trick that Set has set up is this coffin, which has been magically created. It only fits his brother Osiris, and whoever lies down into the coffin will be, shut in and killed and entombed forever. So everyone's trying it out, Cinderella style, and eventually Osiris says, "Oh yeah, I'll get in the coffin," because he's drunk and not paying attention to the schemes of his brother. So he lies down in it, and of course Set then traps him inside it and kills him. So in the story, he gets chopped up into a bunch of little pieces, and parts of his body are thrown all over Egypt, sprinkled along the Nile region, and every part of his body. So Osiris's wife Isis is obviously very upset. Her husband's being chopped up into little pieces, but she's quite cunning. So she decides she's going to use magical powers to go and find the pieces of Osiris's body and put them back together, and then get her husband back. She successfully gets every single piece except for one.
Oh, which one is missing?
The most important piece. She can't find it. Yeah, his dick is missing. So basically, she creates the first mummy out of her husband's body, but the phallus of Osiris is missing. So the Egyptians then start erecting these massive phallic symbols called obelisks all over the country. And it's connected to the mythology of Osiris and the fertility and the story of how, he has to be avenged because of the castration, essentially, that his brother Set did against him. So this is like the original mythology of ancient civilization. And for some reason, it's sort of appealed to everybody so much that the obelisk is present everywhere, all over Europe. And now in North America, it is the symbol of your founding president.
Which is interesting. Yes,
it is. And why that is, why most Americans, or most Westerners that are not looking at the history of this kind of mythology, they'll visit North America, or you ask most North Americans, okay, so who founded your country? What kind of people founded your country? And I think most people would say, oh, we're a Christian country, we were founded by Christians. Why do you have an Egyptian obelisk as the monument to your president?
Well, it's not just the monument to a president. So I kept promising to talk about the Masons.
Yes, please do.
So the midway point in our journey is Springfield, which there's many Springfields. There's Springfield, Illinois. There's Springfield, Missouri, and Springfield, Missouri. My brother wanted to go get coffee in the downtown part where the Route 66 memorialia are. That's where we saw the Finnegan's Wake bar. But as we were driving from the interstate down to the Route 66 part, we passed a mosque. Oh, no, wait. We passed something that looked like a mosque. There was a Shriner mosque. It's the... And then you realize the other thing that you have in all of the architecture in the United States is Masonic temples. These are the men's clubs from the 1920s. This one was built in 1923. It's a mosque. They call it a Shriner mosque. There's Arabic on it. It's got, from the outside, you can see beautiful stained glass and mosaic and things like that. It's quite striking building. There's a giant Scottish Rite temple in Santa Fe. I think here, Santa Fe is in New Mexico is the cathedral city for the region. The Spanish have had a cathedral there for centuries, but there's a giant pink, it's very pink, it's very, very, very pink, Scottish Rite Masonic temple. There's we have...
I hate it already.
Well, what was, Washington had was he Christian?
Can you be a Christian and a Freemason?
Well, we know he was a Freemason. So this layering of mythology that we're talking about, there's the landscape, the naming of things. So we have Little Egypt and Louisiana. We need to get to why Napoleon sold it to the United States, which also has some of this. We have this Masonic overlay, the Egyptian Masonic overlay. I think the obelisk is there not necessarily because they're worrying about Isis and Osiris, but because of the way in which the sense of what it is to be civilized is carried. I think you're right there. And what this has to do with why are there Masonic shrines and temples all across the United States, particularly in the period in which, say, Route 66 was being all of these roads are built on top of old roads, so there's a previous route that is then incorporated into the new ones when they're building the interstates. So you keep wanting me to talk about the Maritime, but I keep ending up back in the land. I wonder how that is happening.
Well, is it the land?
So the interesting thing that Napoleon does, among other things, after taking power after the French Revolution, is go conquer Egypt.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting artifacts of his trying to at least take over Egypt is there. We have copies of it at the University of Chicago in the special collections. This giant survey of Egypt, the description of Egypt. They're in big folio, like elephant folio books of drawings of the artifacts, the land, the daily life, all of this. It's part of the French tradition from the 18th century of the encyclopedias, just full descriptions of everything. But Napoleon sends his scientists and architects and such into Egypt to make an enormous record of the civilization there. And then, Lord Admiral Nelson comes and defeats Napoleon at a big battle. And somebody better look this up, because now I realized I didn't really mean to go here, but now we have.
Is that Trafalgar? No.
That's the monument that's in Trafalgar, and it's Nelson's victory over Napoleon at the Battle of, oh golly, somebody help me and look it up and tell me in the chat. And I think now I don't remember when that battle is. Darn it, help me! Somebody tell me what date this is. The Louisiana Purchase is in 1803, and Napoleon is definitely trying to raise money for his wars. And so the United States sees it as a good deal. They're going to buy all this territory that the French have been in control of, the river system, for all this time. But it's because it's in the context of Napoleon actually trying to get control of the Nile itself.
So he wants to play swapsies.
Another swapsy.
One river. Swapsies. Everyone's playing swapsies. Isn't that? Oh, it's so funny. They'll just take territory and then swap it for another one. So he wants to play swapsies for the Nile. So he's going to give up the Mississippi for the Nile.
I think the thing is, I'm blanking on exactly when these events happen. They all do happen in Napoleonic France, but
okay.
It's like which one came first. Yes, but the effect is, and then because Nelson defeats and this is the British Empire gets its imperial power in after that, right? That's why they have a big monument to Nelson in Trafalgar Square, because of that defeat of Napoleon at the Nile over Egypt. Then the British, they carry on defeating the French Navy, and the British after those Napoleonic Wars. That's when they become the great maritime controller of everything, right? They'd been working on it over the centuries, obviously with the Spanish and the Dutch and everything. But once they defeat the French in that battle, they are now the great maritime power in the world. And I spent a lot of time in graduate school reading Patrick O'Brian novels, which people may enjoy because they're great sea novels. But they're set in this right after the first part of the Napoleonic War and the victory. So we're still, even every time, we keep ending up in this land story. It's the Battle of the Nile, Ethers are, but when was it? What year was the Battle of the Nile? That they're controlling the rivers, and it goes back to the sea, and it's interesting that the land keeps flipping back and forth for us between the land and the sea. They're still pirates.
Still pirates. But it seems like at this stage, I think this is like, I need to set this up, because it seems like at this stage they're not actually concerned with the land as much as they're concerned with land connected to the water sources, these waterways, right? So they're not playing swapsies for chunks of land mass. They're playing swapsies for waterways.
Battle of the Nile, 1798. That would be, but that's not when the Ethers are. That's not when Nelson defeats Napoleon. 1805. Yes, there you go. So, and now, guys, Ken and Hans, please look up exactly why they made the Louisiana Purchase. I know that's in 1803, and Nelson wins in 1805. Okay, so. But this is all of the commercial. This is all. It's going to be control of all of these commercial routes, and we're still in the umbrella theme of the vending machine people. What kind of place is the United States? And now, MAGA people, you're going to get really depressed.
It's
I'm so sorry.
It's all right. We'll make him feel better about it. It's fine.
Okay,
all right,
maybe.
So you just described England, Britain. Britain starts smacking out all of its opponents.
Yep.
In these maritime wars.
Yep.
And then the final boss is the Croissant Kings.
Yep.
So Britain comes and has it out with Napoleon. So it's Nelson versus Napoleon. And crumpets versus croissants.
Crumpets versus croissants.
What they want is control of the Nile.
Yep.
Because Britain wants to become the supermarket of the world. Would I be correct in saying that?
That's correct. The news right now that we've been noticing is like there's no English man that is going to be in any of the great power offices in the UK right now. Now that the Prime Minister is going to be a woman,
I saw that.
And they've appointed various previously colonial people to be the ministers, women and Indians. The English went straight into India, and it was the East India Company trying to control. There was commercial effort to control that subcontinent before it becomes the empire, and they have formal government status there. It was a commercial exercise to begin with.
So the traders wanted to fill up the supermarket with things from all of these different areas.
What's funny is now I'm trying to think. It's like markets. I mean, we are now in the United States is very much intellectually founded by the Scots, because Adam Smith, and the Scots Enlightenment, common sense, and the philosophical tradition that comes from Edinburgh straight to New Jersey. Surprise, surprise. With College of New Jersey, it became Princeton. All those Presbyterians that are trained in the College of New Jersey before they were being trained in Missouri, like my grandparents were, they're trained in the Scottish free trade thinking, thanks to Adam Smith, right? Specialization, trade. Of course, our Enlightenment, United States Enlightenment was always maritime, and it was always commercial, very much so.
So that's basically the British Empire. Then it's the Scots that have become enamored with the idea of free trade. Therefore, they need this sea power. So they establish themselves as the sea power in order to be free trade kings. So, what does that do to the borders of the British peoples?
Well, I'm stuck thinking on free. What's free? Free in what sense? Like free. What does free trade mean? Vending machine people. What does it mean?
It means very different things to very different people, depending on who got traded, I think.
Yeah.
So,
what were you thinking of? You were asking me about just now. There's the free trade element. There's who's trading. There's what's being traded.
Yes.
Who's profiting from all of this?
Yes.
And how the Americans participate in this market economy.
Yes. So when Britain establishes herself as the free trade sea power, what does she do? Because this is what I've been writing about in terms of the identity of the peoples that have been.
Why don't you tell them? Because I'm not sure what you're asking. What do you mean? Because I'm thinking, wait, I don't know enough about the British Empire. I do actually have a colleague in my department who's working on a big giant book on the empire, so I may be blanking because I'm realizing how much I don't know, because that's what he works on. What are you thinking of?
Well, I'm thinking of all of the colonial subjects that suddenly become linked to the free trade empire by providing their products,
right?
All of the things that England or all of the things that Britain needed in order to run the machinery of this massive commercial trading system. So when Britain is invading and taking over different territories, it's not with the view of the Greeks necessarily that they're going to come in and provide philosophy and art and all of these kinds of things. It's a little different. It's setting up a connection to the marketplace of the British system. Right. So when I was looking at the Australian experience of this is how I started thinking about it. What exactly does it mean to be a British colony? The main thing that I could see was that Britain was happy to transplant people wherever it needed them to go. It wasn't concerned with keeping natives in their native homelands at all, as everybody knows. America seems to be very hyper-focused on the transatlantic slave trade. It's a big part of your national mythology, I think. Australia has nothing to do with the transatlantic slave trade, but we do have our own story of press ganging and convict transplantation, which, depending on which historians you read, looked very similar to what happened in the Atlantic situation. So I suppose this is kind of, I have to ask you a question as well. Like when I was looking at Britain, I started to look at Britain as though it was running a massive global supermarket chain that has no respect for national borders of anything outside of the supermarket chain itself. Would that be a kind of correct way of thinking about it? In my view,
that's what you were trying to describe in the Vending Machine People article. Yes.
So this is kind of bringing us back to that Coca-Cola thing we were talking about in the first video. Right. So Britain starts to behave like a massive globalized supermarket chain or like a multinational corporation like Coca-Cola. Right. Therefore, all human beings which have been pulled into this commercial maritime empire are suddenly being processed through it exactly like Coca-Cola products. Right. Because the empire itself doesn't have any respect for tradition or nativity. It just wants the free market, and the free market doesn't give a shit about your nativity or your nationality or your traditions or your religion. It just wants products. It wants to keep the machinery of the sea power running. Right. Which is why I described the people that have been subject to the system as vending machine people, because we've been completely processed, deracinated, taken out of our natural homelands and transplanted and put into the vending machine of empire, which is wherever the empire itself decided to put us. So we've lost the natural markers of nationality as the old world would have known it, and instead we've become these products of empire in the vending machine. So you've got like all of these people in the roadhouse along all of your interior roads, and you've got your toilets and you've got your vending machines. It's kind of like that. The empire, the empire just needs to stock the vending machines. Yes. It doesn't care where it gets the stuff, as long as it gets the stuff and as long as the vending machines are stocked. Yes. So my article was proposing that this is essentially the Western identity of the New World. We are vending machine people. We are not countries as such, which I know will irritate everybody.
Well, and this is
to be told.
Yep. And this is why I'm narrating. It's like, if you have not done this drive that I am describing, and I realized that when my colleagues in that party didn't know the song. It's like they didn't know the song at all, and they didn't, even when they recognized the song, the Route 66 song, go, oh yeah, and they don't know the places on that route. To them, it's a flyover country. It's no place, but it is that interstate, and the vending machine is the perfect representation of what you are trying to describe in the article about who we are as non-places.
Yep. We feed the sea power. As vending machine people, we exist to feed the sea power. And so when people are having conversations about nationalism and they're clinging to the 19th century model, my idea is that this is not going to work. Because you are no longer dealing with 19th century conditions. Britain has made a mess. It is a clusterfuck of free market, eugenics, psychopathy. Which is,
and we say this in English.
yeah, but not by choice.
Well,
fuck's sake, if I could give up English tomorrow, goodbye, ciao, I would never speak English again. I hate this language. Because it hasn't developed.
Okay, we're going to differ. But maybe this is good. We should do an episode on English, on the language itself. Yeah. That's
no,
good.
I would give up English. I would give up English. But
I love English. I still love English, even though I now recognize it as the pirates. It's the pirate language.
Well, I think I'm just jealous because my Greek's terrible.
Okay.
Well, I have to say that, like.
But it's
my Greek was. If my Greek was good, then I would probably not complain about it too much. But we processed. So
our language. Okay, we're in a topic that I hadn't thought about talking about, but we really should. English is as crazy as it is as a language, precisely because it is the pirates' language. It's a port language. It's the language that you end up speaking because you're blending everything that you're in contact with. Yeah.
It is. It's the global homo language. It's the language of the sea.
It very much is our. So I do say that there is hope outside of this, because I think we're gonna somebody make notes for us. Right, we have to do the pirates. We have to, that there is a way out of this horror story that we're describing right now, but we have to go through the horror first.
We just took them to Mordor.
Here we are. And so no, we haven't gotten to Mordor yet. No, there's still one more step, which I showed you you this article yesterday, I think. So here we have Coca-Cola, and it's bad. That article.
Sorry, I was like, what are you talking?
That one. It's bad enough. It's bad enough realizing that the Coca-Cola is stocked in all the vending machines, and we talked last time about the women in their office break, and the Coca-Cola is representative of in effect, therefore, the breakdown of the family and so forth, because it's this medicine that becomes the even Coca-Cola, I mean, in its 70s ads, right? The world singing together. I'd like to buy the world a Coke and stuff like that. The ads that I should have, and you could say, well, it may be good or bad as a drink. It may be good or bad as a company, but it's American.
Yep.
Or is it?
Rum and Coca-Cola working for the Yankee dollar.
Well, yeah, it should. I mean, it should be this American thing. I've been to the Coca-Cola experience in Atlanta. That's the next to the. I've been there because the convention center was built for the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta, and we've had fencing tournaments there regularly back in the day when we did have fencing tournaments. It's next door to the CNN building, which is hilarious of itself. But across the plaza, there is the Coca-Cola. It's not a museum. It's an experience.
What do you experience in the Coca-Cola experience?
Getting wet to partly, because they have a theater where you are in the Coca-Cola adventure, and the seats move and you get water splashed on you for reasons I don't remember. But the best part, the most interesting part, is the hall of drinks, where you go in and there's little dispensers for all the different continents, And the drinks that are, well, they're not bottled by Coca-Cola because the bottlers are all local. It's interesting that Coke just sells the mixtures of the flavors, I guess. But they're actually rather different. The ones that they sell in Asia are rather different from the ones they sell in Africa. The ones in the United States, the North American ones are very sweet compared to the drinks in some of the other. And the floor is sticky because they're all sugar drinks and everyone's going around getting samples and such, right? But Coca-Cola, that's the great Atlanta drink, right? That, what's his, let me have to look at his name because I don't have that mythology down. What was his name? John Smith Pemberton discovered the recipe, very secret recipe for Coca-Cola on May 8th, 1886 in Atlanta.
Discovered is one way of putting it.
Oh yeah? How else might we put it?
Pirated.
Yeah. Why would we say pirated?
She pushed me further down the rabbit hole.
I did.
Willing to go.
I pushed her straight down there. Tell the people where I pushed
the way
you.
To Spain.
Oh no, English.
She pushed me to Spain.
Someone English Pemberton is stealing from Spain.
Yeah. Imagine that. I could never have imagined the English would steal from
the English would steal from Spain from the Spanish.
So there's a Pemberton guy, who claims to have discovered this recipe. Apparently, he stole it from a Spanish family company.
Yep. This is a
Coca-Cola is not even American.
Coca-Cola is not even American. It was the Nuez de Cola Coca, which I've got on screen now. It's a family from Aielo de Malfrit. I've got to get my Spanish right. And there's articles out there, from Der Spiegel and things like that, explaining that yes, in the 19th century, recipe patents and stuff were still sort of getting kicked off, and the family members from Spain were talking about their recipe in various trade fairs, and Pemberton apparently heard described in Philadelphia. He goes home and discovers it, markets it, patents it, and then the United States Patent Office won't recognize the Spanish claim on the product because they hadn't gotten around to patenting it either. They were just sharing their knowledge of their cola and coca mix.
They were having a good time.
Yes.
They weren't prepping for piracy.
Well, no. And so you could say, American we were founded by pirates, Drake and Hawkins. We've continued to be pirates, and we're behaving like pirates in all of the world constantly. I mean, it got more depressing. It's not just Coca-Cola is stolen. It's the problem of the great period. This is Larry Romanoff's journalism, if you're curious about following up on him. The great period of American industrial power is, of course, immediately post World War II, because we'd squished everybody else.
Just like Britain.
Well, I mean, that's the period, of course, when the United States takes over from the British Empire, having made sure that we are now in control of the oceans, and we're kind of being challenged on that as we speak in this moment, 77 years later. That we've been behaving like pirates and trying to control the ports and the movement of goods and claiming property that wasn't necessarily ours to claim. It's a little it's a little crushing if you're a bit MAGA from flyover country, where
I mean, he didn't even bother trying to come up with a different name.
They just switched
the laziest piracy star was switch it around.
Coca-Cola
and front there, be right.
Change the K to a C, and yeah.
It's like calling everything just, New Holland or New Amsterdam. Just stuck, we'll just stick a new at the beginning. Don't bother with the new names. No one will care anyway. Lazy pirates, terrible.
There are some very interesting. I passed Carthage today, I think.
Oh, really?
Yes, and Atlanta. No, wait. The
Uh-huh.
place names in this route are quite. I mean, there's multiple Springfields because every place needs a Springfield. Um,
Okay.
yes,
So you've got a Carthage.
there's a whole history to be made off of the place names of
Okay.
these, and they're all advertising. They're absolutely all advertising. Come to you if you from old Amsterdam, you want new Amsterdam because you want to lure people here.
Yep.
It's one big carnival after another.
Mm.
Wizard of Oz. Pretending
Well,
pretending to have the power that you think he does. Yes.
the Emerald City. Yeah, the wizard behind the curtain. Well, this is why I started talking about the race issue. So if you can understand that a a really uninventive bastard takes Coca-Cola from the Spanish, brings it over to America, and then this product is suddenly Americanized. That's also happened to people.
Yes.
That's also happened to people under the Anglo-American system. People that were previously a thing are now completely repackaged, and they're utterly deracinated in this pirate system, including the British peoples that were transplanted around the planet in this process.
Yes.
So this brings us to the people like Rachel Dolezal or whoever else you'd be thinking of that doesn't quite fit the category that you think that they should be in. Because America thinks in eugenics categories. It thinks in color code, which is a commercial practice because it's linked to your transatlantic slavery, which obviously involved African slaving that the Elizabethan privateers championed. You know, they became Olympic world champions at this, getting African slaves and shipping them over across the Atlantis. But it wasn't just the Africans that were shipped around. They did it to other populations as well. Quite notably, as I've mentioned in the article, the Irish and Scots-Irish slave trade was enormous. Celtic people were pushed onto boats. English people were pushed onto boats as well. Half of the sailors that were working in these navies, if you can call them honorable navies, were indentured into the service on the boat. They didn't even want to be on it. This entire system that was set up by the Elizabethans ran on piracy and slavery, from the people that were operating the boats to the people that were forcibly put onto the boats. So about the vending machine people, and I'm talking about race relations in North America, I've taken quite a keen interest in looking at this because by now everyone understands I'm not American, I'm not white, I've had experience in Africa. I spend most of my time around Africans, and especially Coptics, Greeks. So contrasting all of the relationships between different ethnicities in these different imperial systems has shocked me so much. And like the process of pulling Celts out of their native homelands is exactly the same as pulling Africans out of West Africa. If you look at where Celtic people belong, they're indigenous to the British Isles. They should be counted as indigenous to that kind of like Northern European spot. They're all squished and chased off their ancestral homelands until they basically ended up with the cupboard. The cupboard called Ireland and Scotland and Wales, you know, but there was an apartheid system that was put in place against them. They had their language taken away from them, but then they were put on boats. That's how you end up with Jamaica having a ethnic minority of 25% Irish descent. The Jamaican patois is Irish mixed with West African. They've creolized somehow to kind of, create this amazing, I think it's amazing. I love Jamaican accent, but what happened in the Caribbean, it literally was Pirates of the Caribbean. So why was that? Why were we pushed onto boats why were Celtic people sprinkled all over the planet? It was because the Elizabethans wanted people to work in sugar plantations. And in America, you had African slaves, which were, kind of sprinkled around to work on these plantations. But in Australia, we didn't have African slaves. We had Celts. We had the sugar plantations up in Queensland in the northern state. But the process was the same. The empire doesn't care what color you are.
Right.
And this is why I wanted to write this article, because instead of thinking about everybody in terms of their physiognomy, I think about everyone in terms of their empire and what has happened to them since the British system, went crazy. And after its collapse, what actually are we? I don't think in terms of the racial categories of North America, because I'm thinking in terms of the imperial systems that created these countries. So if I have conversations with North Americans now, you guys are starting to talk about Christian nationalism.
Right.
You have to analyze the imperial system that created your country, or you won't understand how you ended up in the mess you're in. Same thing as Australia, only our experience has been different. Our political mess is different. And a big part of that has been that we followed America for 80 years into all of your wars, all of your conflicts. The Australian continent has essentially become free market addicted to the point where we've lost all sense of what it means to be a nation. We're still colonial. We're running as colonies. It's like on a hyperdrive system here. But we have, as colonial subjects, defended the American waterways. We followed you into conflict. Like the same way we followed the British into conflict, when they sent us up to the Bosphorus and whatever, Gallipoli, all of these things, it was war to defend waterways. That's it. So hopefully now everyone can understand what kind of mythology I want to tell about myself, my people, who even are my people. What do I have in common with a pale-skinned person from Oklahoma? I'm not the same race. We've had a completely different experience, but we've had a very similar experience. The empire has shuffled. Right. So that's kind of where, that's where the article is anchored. That's what it means to be a vending machine person. It's a loss of race. It's a loss of nationality. It's a loss of language. It's a loss of culture to be brought completely and absolutely to be absorbed into this maritime sea power, and the thought process of the free market and what that means for culture and relationships and tribes and families and all of it. And it only happened because the Elizabethans got rid of the Catholic faith.
And there we go.
I had to get that in there. I had to get it in there.
Well, but that's where we're heading. And that what I was recognizing when we were on the route, that you spend any time on the American interstate system, you can be, depends on what you're listening to. And we were listening to a Charlie Strauss novel, which fit the theme too, because he's talking, well, that's another story. But you're surrounded by ads, billboards. You're surrounded by carbon copy restaurants and signs, and you
mean like franchises, like McDonald's?
Yeah, the franchises, right? You can, okay. And you can predict where to get off the river to get the good coffee, because you have a string of the same truck stops and so forth across the country. And there is no sense of, you can get a sense of place if you're reading the place names of the road signs and things like that, but there's the interstate system, people complain about it all the time. And then I think the flyover country part is they're recognizing the deadness of the imperial culture that drove these interstates through the middle of the landscape. And there, what do you see when you're driving through, for example, Missouri, signs for there's some vineyards and things like that. The most prominent, or at least it sticks in my memory, of the roadside attractions on I-44 in middle of Missouri is Uranus Fudge Factory. It's a planet. Why are you laughing?
You know why I'm laughing. It's hilarious.
And it's for real. There's another fudge factory, it's like you're buying sugar stuff, and they do it with this. I mean, we were talking about dicks, right? The obelisks. Uranus Fudge Factory, middle of America. It's the best fudge you can get. It's Uranus Fudge. The signs go on for miles. It's around 80 miles east of Springfield on I-44. And they have, I kept wanting, I should want to stop right, because they have roadside attraction and dinosaurs and things like that. But that is the level of what is the United States now. It was the stolen Coca-Cola and nothing but this faux mythology. I was trying to take pictures on the way home today in Chicago, and what showing them right now is another thing that you can see if you're traveling along the interstate state. There's mammoths, apparently. We've gone from
Are they living?
Well, it says Ice Age giants at the zoo. It's at the zoo. They must be alive. Maybe they're elephants. What I realize is the United States, okay, one, if we were mainly built by pirates and carnival barkers, the Wizard of Oz is truly the most resonant character that we have of who the United States is. Selling the sites, right? There was a thing that happened in the 19th century. Everyone was always talking about seeing the elephant, going to see the elephant, right? You have there's the circus and go to see the elephant. Then I'm driving home and noticed this billboard this afternoon. My husband was driving. I took the pictures of Ice Age giants at the zoo, right? It's all fake. It's all roadside attractions. It's all either glorious if you're in the right mood, or really depressing if you're realizing it's carnival culture and vending machine people. And that's obviously, I mean, and the United States wants to export this to the rest of the world, and the rest of the world says, no, we'd actually like to have our nations and our cultures and our local traditions and our actual families, and not families that are, I have to drive 1,000 miles to see my mom. Yes. Families that are broken up and dispersed around the globe, as the British Empire did with its own people.
Yes.
No wonder we're in crisis now.
We're in crisis. We're in a global crisis because the empire has collapsed and left everyone without mythology.
Yes.
Again, bringing me back to how vending machine people can establish an actual identity. It's going to happen no matter what. It's going to happen. Because in history, people have always established new identities after empires collapse. Obviously, when Rome and its commercial military empire collapsed, new peoples emerged, new languages emerged, new cultures emerged. For a very long time, there was no such thing as the French, right? But now the French exist because Rome collapsed. The Gallic Latins fused, they made France. So this is going to happen. You're going to get ethnogenesis. My problem with the the way that people are talking about it at the moment is still using cargo categories that are only applicable under the Elizabethan system to describe people. It's keeping everybody mired in something which doesn't have any relevance anymore. Because if you're going to be embracing a Christian nationalism, that already happened in Egypt a very, very long time ago. It already happened in the Coptic world a very, very long time ago. And it had absolutely nothing to do with skin color. It happened because an empire adopted the faith of the church and I wanted to get this in just so that it was in our conversation today, Doc. But the New Testament has recorded how this happened even in the Acts of the Apostles. And this is something that I put into the Vending Machine People article as well. If you read in the New Testament, the book of Acts, you will see that Philip is walking and sees a man who's called the Ethiopian eunuch. He's traveling to Jerusalem for the feast, reading the scriptures. This man is a practicing Hebrew. He's an Israelite who is following the temple religion, and he's come to Jerusalem for the feast. And Philip sees him. Philip, being Greek, sees an Ethiopian and says, "This is one of my people. He's here for the feast." Goes over to him, runs to him, and says, "What are you reading?" And he explains, "I'm reading the scriptures. I'm reading this passage, and I don't really understand it." And so Philip says, now I can tell him Moshiach has arrived. Christ is here. He's come. So he explains to the Ethiopian Hebrew about Christ, Jesus Christos, Jesus Christ. He's come. Our people have found their king. He's, been crucified for us, resurrected, etc. The Ethiopian says, "What do I need to do?" And Philip says, "I will baptize you now, if you want." So he says, "Yeah, great, baptize me." So Philip baptizes the Ethiopian eunuch and then leaves him go on his merry way, and he returns back to what would have been then the Aksumite Empire. The ancient Christians had absolutely no color line. This did not factor into the interaction between the Greek Philip and the Ethiopian Hebrew eunuch. The point was the faith has to travel the roads.
Right.
So if you're going to make a nation out of Christendom again, you have to travel the roads and not the skin color. You have to stop thinking in terms of skin color. If it's going to be Christendom again, labels have to be destroyed. They're no good. They're no good to any of us, because the vending machine is all labels. There's all these categories keeping us in the vending machine. As long as you use the categories, you'll stay in the vending machine. I use apostolic language. I don't use vending machine language anymore. So that's my little thesis that I put in the blog, which is on Gab if you want to read it. Hopefully you can understand it a bit better now, because it was a lot of things to cover. But I don't know, Doc. I hope people start to think about this, because this is the Greek mind, this ancient Greek mind. Greece always saw itself with Ethiopia. Even, in the myth of the Trojan War, the Greeks asked Romans to come and fight with them in the Trojan War. So Europe and Africa have always been interacting. There is absolutely no such thing as a white nation or white development without Africa. It has never existed. And if it did, the Bible wouldn't have the story of the Ethiopian eunuch being baptized and taking the faith down into Ethiopia. So if you want Christian nationalism, you have to think like a Copt. You can't think like an Elizabethan. It's just not going to work. Whether or not everyone's willing to do it, I don't know. But you're going to seem pretty strange to people. I know I seem very, very strange to everybody. I'm having a good time. Not being white is fun.
Hallelujah!
I like being a wog. It's the best.
Wonderful. Yes, and you will when you see the video, you'll see I've been illustrating what you've been saying too.
Oh, fantastic! I'm glad. I did a long monologue.
No, that was so it worked this time. We got you to the end of at least what we were trying to show you in Kiltz's article, and amen. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you. So
I'm back from my road trip. I'm going to be on another little trip with Etherzar, who are going to be at BaseCon this weekend. We have some plans to have Kiltz with us in a video or in a conversation this weekend, but we haven't figured out the tech on that yet. And you can't rely on me.
For the love of God, someone supervise her.
Please help me. Right.
Make sure it's all plugged in.
Make sure it's all plugged in. In any case, hopefully we have more to talk about. Now you'll have much more of the backstory on Draco Alchemicus. So if we're talking about that at base.con, that will be posted. And we will be back next week. What are we going to talk about next week? Should we talk about the girl story?
Oh yes, we should.
Okay, yes, let's talk about the girl story. So we will see you next Wednesday for the stream. And thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your comments. I think we have some people are declaring that they've bought the t-shirt. So and that is a wait, I gotta refresh here. Ken says, been there, got the t-shirt, Gaslit Motel, World Fairs. We have more to talk about.
Don't trigger me now, Ken.
don't. Wait, we're never gonna. We gotta stop now. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us. We will see you next week. Until then, I guess we need a sign-off call, right? Look for pigeons. Look for the pigeons. Look for the ark.
pigeons.
Look for the pigeons. Good night.
Good night.